Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I'm not good at starting things, so I'll just start. My name is Walt Greer. I'm 53 years old and I drive overnight freight across the flat middle of the country. Kansas mostly, some Nebraska, parts of Colorado and Missouri depending on the week. Industrial goods, agricultural equipment, the kind of cargo that needs to move at night because the roads are clearer and nobody needs to watch it arrive. I have been doing this for 11 years. Before that, I did construction. Before that, I did a stretch of things that didn't work out, including 2 marriages, neither of which I blame entirely on the other person involved. I have a daughter named Callie. She's 28 and lives in Denver and works in environmental consulting and is significantly smarter than me, which I've always considered one of my better accomplishments, even though I can't take much credit for it. We talk on Sunday afternoons. That's our thing. It has been our thing for about 6 years, and I don't miss it if I can help it. I drive alone. I have driven alone for 11 years, and I am fine with it. You get used to the inside of your own head when that's most of what you've got. I keep the CB on for company and I run an AM radio underneath it, low, mostly for noise. About 2 years ago, I found a late night show out of a small station in western Kansas, hosted by a retired school teacher named Hobart, who has been doing amateur astronomy as a hobby since before I was old enough to drive. He does 2 hours most weeknights, talking about whatever is happening in the sky, meteor showers, planetary positions, what to look for and when. He has a voice like someone's grandfather explaining something at a kitchen table, slow and steady and not trying to impress anyone. I do not care about astronomy. I want to be clear about that. I couldn't have told you the difference between a planet and a star in terms of what you'd actually see looking up before I started listening to Hobart. I listened to him because the alternative was silence or talk radio, and both of those get heavy after midnight on a straight highway with nothing on either side. Hobart was just easy to have in the background. That's all it was. I listened to his show 3 or 4 nights a week for almost 2 years. And then one night, he said something I almost missed, and I have not been able to unhear it since. It was a Tuesday in late autumn. I was somewhere on a long straight stretch of highway in central Kansas, the kind of road where you set the cruise and your hands barely move for 40 minutes at a time. Hobart was talking about Jupiter, where it was sitting in the sky that week, how to find it, what it looked like through a decent backyard telescope. He had been talking about Jupiter for maybe 10 minutes in that easy way he had, comfortable with the subject, not rushing. Then he stopped. Not the way a man stops when he loses the thread of what he was saying. Different than that. The way a man stops when his eyes land on something that doesn't fit. A few seconds of dead air. On radio, a few seconds of dead air is a long time. Then Hobart said, in the same calm voice he used for everything, that he was looking at a feed from an amateur telescope network he was part of, and that there was something exiting Jupiter's upper atmosphere that he could not account for. He said the size of it appeared to be significant. He said he was going to make some calls, and that he was going to sign off early tonight. He said goodnight. The music program that normally closed out his show came on mid-song, like whoever was running the board wasn't ready for him to be done. I drove for another 2 hours. I thought about what he said on and off, the way you think about something that caught your ear without fully explaining why. When I got to the depot and did my paperwork and drove to the motel I use on that route, I was still thinking about it. I told myself Hobart had probably sorted it out and would talk about it on the next show. Hobart talked about everything on the show. That was the whole point of the show. The next show was 2 nights later. Hobart did a full 2 hours about a meteor shower expected later in the month. He talked about the best viewing times and the best directions to look and the history of that particular shower going back a couple hundred years. He did not say one word about Jupiter or about what he had seen on the feed or about why he had signed off early. I was sitting in a rest stop parking lot in Nebraska when it aired, and I almost called in during the listener segment at the end of the show. Hobart always did 15 minutes at the end where people could call in with questions. I had never called into a radio show in my life, and I did not call in that night either. But I thought about it. 3 nights later, Hobart's show didn't air. A pre-recorded music program ran in the slot. Old country songs from the 50s, the kind of thing a small AM station throws on when they need to fill time without thinking about it. I pulled up the station's website from my phone at a rest stop. It was a basic page, the kind that looks like it was built 15 years ago and updated maybe twice since. The show was listed in the schedule. There was no notice about it being on a break. No explanation of any kind. It was just not there. I sat in that rest stop parking lot for a while after that. I had been ignoring what Hobart said for 3 days with reasonable success. I stopped being able to ignore it. I called Callie on Sunday, the same as always. We talked about her week first, her job, a situation with a co-worker she was navigating, whether she was going to come visit at Christmas, normal stuff. Then I told her about Hobart's show. I told it the way I describe a strange noise coming from an engine, just the facts in order. Man was talking about Jupiter, stopped mid-sentence, said something was exiting the atmosphere, said the size was significant, signed off early, never mentioned it again. Show disappeared 3 days later. Callie was quiet for a second after I finished. Then she asked me to say again exactly what Hobart said about the size. I repeated it. Significant was the word he used. She said she was going to look into something and she would call me back. I said okay, and we hung up and I went about my afternoon. She called back 4 hours later. Callie usually calls back in a day or two. 4 hours meant she had sat down and actually gone looking and found something. She said she'd been on a professional forum she used for work, an environmental monitoring network where researchers and field workers shared data and flagged unusual readings. She said someone had posted about gravitational micro-variations being logged at monitoring stations across several countries. Small variations, she said, consistent, and the direction they were coming from lined up with Jupiter's current position in the sky. She said the thread had been active for about a week, and then the person who posted it deleted the whole thing. The replies went quiet after that. She said she did not know what it meant. She said She was not saying it meant anything. But I know my daughter's voice and the way she sounds when she is working to keep it level, and she was working to keep it level. I asked her what she thought it was. She said she didn't know. She said whatever might have left Jupiter's atmosphere would be so far away that nothing about it could physically affect Earth, and I should not worry about that part. I asked her how far Jupiter was. She told me. It was a big number, the kind of number that sounds like it should make you feel better. It didn't make me feel better. After we hung up, I was at a motel in central Kansas, and I went out to the parking lot and found Jupiter in the southwest, the way Hobart had taught me, without ever meaning to teach me. It was bright and steady, and looked exactly like it had always looked every night for my entire life, that I had never once paid attention to it. I stood there in the motel parking lot and looked at it for a long time. The thing that kept nagging at me, the thing I couldn't shake, was that it had always looked the same, every night, for as long as anyone had been looking at it. And if something had been living inside it this whole time, something big enough to matter, it had looked the same the entire time that thing was in there. I went to bed. I didn't sleep well. 2 weeks went by. I ran my routes. I tried a different AM station at night, a talk radio program out of Wichita, where two men argued about local politics until 2 in the morning. After 3 nights of that, I went back to the music program in Hobart's slot. At least it didn't make me feel worse about things. On a clear Wednesday night with no wind at all, I pulled into a rest stop in western Kansas around 2 in the morning. 2 other trucks in the lot, a light on inside the rest stop building. I got out to stretch and went inside and got coffee from the machine and came back out and stood by my truck the way I always do for a few minutes before I get back in. I looked up. In a flat country with no towns close by, the sky on a clear night is something else. It's the whole thing, edge to edge. More stars than you think there are supposed to be. I had been looking at it my whole life, without really seeing it until the last few months had made me start paying attention. I found Jupiter. I wasn't looking for it specifically. My eyes just went there. There was something next to it, not a star. I had been looking at enough sky in the past few weeks to know what stars looked like and what they didn't look like, and this didn't look like one. It had a slight spread to it, a very faint smear of light just off to one side of Jupiter. Small, faint enough that I stood there for a full minute, making sure I wasn't creating it out of nothing, the way tired eyes will sometimes make shapes out of dark. It was there. The door of the rest stop opened, and a big man in a canvas coat came out and saw me looking up and walked over. That happens sometimes at 2 in the morning in a rest stop with no one else around. People get sociable. His name was Gus, he told me, and he'd been running nights for 20 years out of a depot in Missouri. I pointed out the smear of light near Jupiter without saying anything about why I was pointing it out. Gus looked at it for a while with his hands in his coat pockets. He said he had been seeing that for about 3 weeks. He said he figured it was a comet. I asked him if he thought comets moved that fast. He said he had no idea. He wasn't that kind of guy. But then he said he was pretty sure it had been closer to Jupiter 3 weeks ago than it was now, and he might be wrong about that, but he didn't think he was. He said it had been a strange few months for the sky in general. Said He'd noticed things being off without being able to say exactly what. I asked him what he meant by off. He thought about it for a second and said everything just looked a little closer than usual, like the depth was gone. He shrugged like he knew that didn't make sense and went back to his truck. I stood in that lot until the cold moved past uncomfortable into serious. When I got back in my truck, I sat with the heater running and looked at that faint smear of light near Jupiter and did not pull out of the lot for the better part of half an hour. I found a contact email for Hobart's show on the station's website, one of those generic addresses that may or may not reach an actual person. I sent a short message from my phone. I told him I had been a regular listener and that I had been in my truck the night he signed off early, and that I had been noticing a light near Jupiter for about 3 weeks and wanted to know if he'd ever gotten a straightforward explanation for what he'd seen on the feed. I did not expect a response. Hobart called me 4 days later. His number came up as a private call. He sounded like his radio voice, but turned down, quieter, the way people talk when they're choosing their words more carefully than usual. He asked me right away how long I had been watching the light, and I told him 3 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was moving faster than it should be moving. He said it the way you say something you've been sitting with for a while. Not like news. Like a weight he'd been carrying. I asked him what he meant by that. He said a natural object coming out of Jupiter's atmosphere, something pushed out by internal pressure, or some kind of geological event inside the planet, would behave the way objects in space behave. Gravity would curve its path. The pull from the sun would influence it. It would slow and drift and follow the rules that everything else out there follows. He said he'd been watching those rules his whole adult life, and he knew them the way I knew the roads I drove. This object was not following them. It was moving in a straight line, consistent speed, straight line, from the moment it came out of the atmosphere. He said those two things together, in space, meant something was making it do that. Something was maintaining it. Straight lines at consistent speeds don't happen on their own out there. They require a reason. He stopped talking for a second, and I could hear him breathing. I asked him where the line pointed. He said the path extended forward, passed through the inner solar system. He said he didn't want to be more specific than that. He said he didn't want to be wrong. I asked him why he took the show off the air. He told me he'd made some calls after that first night, reached out to some people in his amateur network and a couple of contacts he had at a university program he'd collaborated with years ago. A few days after he made those calls, he got a phone call from someone he had never spoken to before. The person knew the names of the people in his amateur network. They knew specific things about his setup, his equipment, details he had never put anywhere public. The person was polite the whole time. They suggested that Hobart take a break from discussing his current observations on air. They were not threatening about it. They were just calm and specific and thorough. Hobart said he was not a brave man. He said it the same way Dottie had talked about her instrument readings, like reading something off a page, just a fact about himself. No apology for it. I thanked him and we hung up. I drove the rest of that night with everything off. No CB, no radio, nothing. Just the engine and the road and the dark on both sides and the sky above it. And somewhere in that sky, a light moving in a straight line toward something. I called Callie the following Sunday and told her about Hobart, the straight line, the consistent speed, the phone call that made him go quiet. This time, she didn't tell me it probably meant nothing. She said she had kept looking after our last call and she had found a post on a public astronomy forum where someone had put up a size estimate for the object based on how much light it was putting out. The post had been edited twice before it was deleted completely. She had found a cached version through a search before it was fully scrubbed. The estimate put the object somewhere in the range of a large moon. Not a rock, not a piece of ice, something with real mass, something that, if you saw it and didn't know what it was, you might look at the way you look at the moon, that kind of size. I asked her how significant that mass was in terms of what it could do. She was quiet for a second. Then she said that something with that mass passing close to Earth would affect the tides. She said it carefully, evenly, and then she said it would affect more than the tides, and she left it there. I sat with that. I asked her how long before it reached the inner solar system based on the speed Hobart described. She said she didn't know exactly. She said months, possibly. She said the people who were officially tracking it were not making their timeline easy to find, and that the fact that it was hard to find was its own kind of answer. I asked her if she was scared. A pause. Not long. Then she said yes. I appreciated her for saying it straight. That's always been the thing about Callie. I drove that week and the week after. I looked at the sky every time I stopped. The light near Jupiter was brighter than when I had first noticed it, not by a lot, but by enough that I was certain it wasn't in my head. Gus had said it looked closer, and Gus had been right about that. On a Friday night, I was running a route through the eastern Colorado, and I came to a long stretch of highway where there were no towns within 30 miles in either direction. I pulled over on the shoulder. I cut the headlights. I got out. The sky out there on a clear night is the same as Kansas. The whole thing, top to bottom, more stars than your eyes want to process all at once. I stood on the shoulder of the road in the cold, and I looked up, and I found the object without trying. It was bright enough now to have a color, not white like the stars around it, something warmer, like the very last color a sky holds right after the sun goes down, that thin line of warmth at the horizon right before the dark takes over. That color, but small, a faint warm point in among all the cold white ones. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about what Hobart said. Straight line, consistent speed. I thought about what those two things meant. I had driven long enough to know that when you are going somewhere and you don't stop and you don't change direction, it is because you know where you are going. You have a destination. You are not wandering. I tried to think about what kind of thing moves like that. I got back in my truck and drove. I am still running my routes. I thought for a while about stopping, taking my savings and going somewhere. I got as far as thinking about where I would go before I understood that there wasn't anywhere. The inner solar system is the inner solar system. You cannot drive out of it. Callie came out to visit in February. We drove east of Denver on a Saturday night and found a stretch of open land outside the city lights and stood in a field together and looked at the sky. The object is easy to find now without knowing what to look for. It has moved away from Jupiter visibly. made its way through a section of sky it was not in 3 months ago. It is its own thing now, separate from Jupiter, making its own way through. We stood in that cold field and looked at it and didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. Callie put her hands in her coat pockets and her breath came out in small clouds, and we just stood there together the way you stand next to someone when there isn't a fix available and you both know it. Most people I know have seen it without knowing what they were looking at. A slightly warm-colored point of light in a sky full of them. Comet, people say, when they notice it at all. A few people on the internet have been saying comet and getting a lot of agreement from people who should know better. It still looks like a star to anyone who hasn't been watching it move. I keep thinking about the deciding. I have tried on every other explanation for what it is. Something Jupiter threw out on its own. A weird orbit nobody's explained to me yet. Something with a boring name that astronomers know about, and I don't. I have tried each one and none of them fits because of what Hobart said. Straight line, consistent speed. Those two things together mean intention. They mean a destination. In the whole cold rulebook of how space works, those two things together mean something is going somewhere on purpose. And I think about how long it was inside Jupiter before it left. Jupiter is a big planet. I looked it up after Hobart's show. Bigger than all the other planets in this solar system put together. Storms inside it larger than the Earth. And something with the mass of a moon lived inside that for long enough that no one looking at Jupiter through telescopes for the past 400 years ever saw a sign of it. Not a wobble, not a shadow, not a ripple in those cloud bands everyone has seen pictures of. Just Jupiter, same as always. While something enormous and patient sat inside it and waited for whatever it was waiting for. And then one night, it stopped waiting. I don't know if it knows we're here. I think about that more than I should. Something that has been sitting inside a gas giant long enough to become invisible to 4 centuries of observation has a patience I can't put numbers to. A thing that patient, that old, may not notice something as small as Earth the way I don't notice individual pieces of gravel on the highway. We could be nothing to it, specks, not worth registering. I try to stay with that thought. It is the more comfortable thought. The other thought is that it has been inside Jupiter, which is close enough to have been watching us for the entire time we have existed. Close enough to have seen us build our cities and light up our night side and start bouncing signals off our atmosphere and out into space. Close enough that patient is not the right word for what it has been. Patient means you are waiting for something. Maybe it was not waiting. Maybe it was just watching. And maybe watching us for a few hundred years was all it needed before it decided to come and see. I don't let myself finish that thought if I can help it. The light is brighter this week than last week. I know that because I look at it every night now. Every rest stop, every time I step out of the truck for air, every wide open stretch of sky between where I am and where I'm going. I can't stop looking at it. I have tried. There is some part of my brain that has decided it needs to keep eyes on it, the way your eyes will find a movement at the edge of your vision and refuse to let it go unexamined, no matter how many times you look and find nothing there. The difference is that there is something there. The difference is that it is moving. Callie and I still talk on Sundays. She gives me her week, and I give her mine. We don't talk about the object every call, but it sits under the conversation the whole time, the same way certain things do. She asked me last week if I was okay, and I told her I was running my routes, and she said that was not what she asked, and I said I know. I think about Hobart sometimes. I hope he is doing okay, wherever he is. I hope the people who called him were at least honest with him about what was coming, even if they made him go quiet about it. He deserved that. He was just a retired teacher who loved the sky and talked about it in the dark so that people driving through the night would have something steady to listen to. He found something that didn't want to be found, and he said so out loud for about 30 seconds on a Tuesday night before he understood what that was going to cost him. I think about those 30 seconds more than anything else about this whole thing. 30 seconds of dead air on a small AM station in western Kansas that almost nobody was listening to. 30 seconds where a gentle, careful man looked at something on a screen and told the truth about it before the truth became something he wasn't allowed to tell. That's how close it came to nobody knowing. The highway is the same as it always was. Dark on both sides, the beam of the headlights cutting a piece of it out ahead of me and leaving the rest alone. The same roads I have driven for 11 years, the same flat land, the same sky. Except now, I know what's in it. The light gets a little brighter every week. I have started to be able to find it without looking. The way you find the moon on a clear night, the way your eyes just know where to go. It is still too far away to be anything but a point of light. It is not as far away as it was. And every night I drive beneath it, watching it come through the windshield of my truck, while the radio runs and the CB crackles and the rest of the world sleeps without knowing that something the size of a moon left Jupiter's atmosphere under its own power and pointed itself at the inner solar system and has not changed direction once since the night Hobart fiends saw it on a screen in a small room in western Kansas and told the truth for 30 seconds before the world went quiet. I keep the headlights on. I keep driving. I watch it come.